Before we begin this episode, I want to talk to you about mental health and the importance of finding a meaningful community. It's been a topic that is often shared on my podcast and an ongoing reminder of the support we need to get through our day-to-day journey in an environment that can feel so overwhelming. If you're a queer person of color living in New York, there's a wonderful resource that I would like to share with you. My friend Sohab Haved, a licensed mental health counselor based in NYC, is launching a virtual adult queer POC group on September 22nd. It's a dedicated communal space designed to help you navigate the challenges of our intersecting identities. Together, the group will explore key topics such as managing identity-related stress, including rejection sensitivity, internalized stigma, and concealment pressures. Then there's strengthening relational safety, like creating healthy boundaries and repairing harm in relationships, and building community through people with similar lived experiences and backgrounds. If you're looking for support and tools with connecting with community, then check out Sohab's virtual adult queer POC group. You can find more details in the show notes, and you can email for more at sohaib@fullyintegratedtherapy.com. So, welcome to the Bunby Chronicles podcast, and I am so excited to bring back my returning guest, Brittany Spanos. Brittany was on my episode that I did about Janet Jackson's 60th birthday back in May, and so I've been a big fan of Brittany's work for quite some time through her work with Rolling Stone, but also, her being a recurring guest on DJ Louie's Pop Pantheon podcast, and so. We're going to talk about the 25th anniversary of Aaliyah's passing, which happened on August 25th. And it is wild to think back about how many years it has been, but at some points it feels like it's been yesterday, you know? And so we'd like to talk about her upbringing, the controversy, her short-lived music success, and also the untimely passing of what could have been, and the messy rollout of her posthumous legacy and her cultural musical impact today. So, Brittany, again, welcome. And how are your feelings coming up with Aaliyah's 25th anniversary of her passing?
I mean, it is so crazy that, I think for a lot of people, especially with everything that happened in 2001, like it's like her passing happened so soon before 9/11 that it was almost kind of like not that much time, I think, in the cultural consciousness to even process or grieve that someone so young, had died so tragically. Um, and I feel like it's still kind of always this like strange thing of remembering that she's gone and remembering that. But it is yeah, I mean it's just like really depressing to look through how little
Mhm.
work we got from her, or how much more we didn't get to experience of Alia.
Yeah, and how old were you when she passed? And do you remember
Um
where you were at during that time when you found
I
out?
don't really remember at all. Like I was 9, I think. Yeah, I must have just turned 9. But yeah, I don't have any memory of learning it. I feel like, I mean, I'm sure it was through like MTV.
Mhm.
And, I think this was still like a period of time where I was kind of still like really discovering and solidifying my music taste. And I think everything was just through MTV and VH1. And so that was my
Mm.
my big experience of pop music and pop culture. But I feel like it was probably like MTV News, to be honest. Like it feels
Yeah.
like that was how I learned all of my pop culture news at that time.
Yeah, I remember my first music celebrity death was Kurt Cobain. I was 11 years old, but I wasn't listening to alternative rock at the time. I remember it was all
Yeah.
over the news, but I didn't seem to understand what the big deal
Hmm.
was around it because I never listened to Nirvana. And, looking back on it now, it's like, wow, what a cultural turning point. And Aaliyah, I was about 18 years old. I had just turned
Yeah.
18. I had graduated from high school. I remember the first half of 2001 felt so optimistic. I was finally ready to get out of high school and going to
Yeah.
college. And I remember Janet Jackson's All For You album, which we had talked about in the last episode,
Yeah.
and Lady Marmalade and, Britney Spears. And it felt very optimistic at that time. And Aaliyah was
Yeah.
coming out of a very successful run with the Romeo Must Die and the Try Again song. And here she was releasing that album. And I got that Red album, the last album, a week before she died. And I remember the first song was Rock the Boat that really stuck with me.
Yeah.
And when she passed, I was coming home from work. I was having a summer job, and my brother just came in and said, "Oh, Aaliyah passed away." And I was like, "You got to be kidding me." And I was kind of in this weird daze. And
Yeah.
I think I was listening to the radio and people were calling in, they were crying. Radio callers were crying and it was very jolting. I just remembered I felt like I couldn't talk. I mean, this was before social media, so I didn't really have anyone to really talk to about this. It felt
Yeah.
kind of like this is a person who I listened to from late junior high to throughout high school. So it felt like part of my childhood was already affected. And as you mentioned, 9/11 would soon happen, very like maybe like a few weeks after that. And then, the war in Afghanistan, Iraq, and I was like, wow, I'm starting my adulthood in this very ominous
Yeah.
life that I never would have imagined. So I felt like Aaliyah's death was the first beginning of that. So
Yeah.
that's the way I look at it. And it's kind of interesting because I saw Brandy and Monica's tour last year, and Maya was a surprise guest, which
Yeah.
was unbelievable. And I always think to myself, wow, I mean, those three came back with a vengeance. They're having a renaissance, and I'm like, wow, I wish Aaliyah could be there to be a part of that whole um era, the celebration of that era.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I think about that quite a bit. And, to kind of go over like maybe Aaliyah's background, she was born in January 16th, 1979. She was born as Aaliyah Dana Houghton. She has an older brother, or she had an older brother, Rashad, who she was very close to and even accompanied her to the MTV VMAs in 2000. Barry Hankerson was her uncle, and he was an entertainment lawyer. He was married to Gladys Knight, which provided like the first connection to the music industry for Aaliyah. And Aaliyah was born in Brooklyn, but spent most of her years in Detroit. High achieving student, attended the Detroit High School for the Fine and Performing Arts. She was on Star Search at 10 years old, performed at Glass Night in Vegas. So, it's interesting because when we look at her upbringing, she was raised in show business. And, we look at stars like Britney Spears, Brandy, Whitney Houston, who started very young and were pushed very heavily in the entertainment business. How would you describe Aaliyah's upbringing, especially with her uncle Barry, who would be a pivotal figure in her music career?
Yeah. I think this was such an era of um trying to find the next child prodigy. Like I think that was constantly like a thing that was happening over, you know, from the 70s through the 90s. And I think people looked at like Michael and Janet Jackson as like emblems of this, like, anything is possible, or like, this kid from the middle of nowhere, from someplace, that's like maybe a lower income or working class, like they can become the biggest stars in the world. And we had sort of seen it repeatedly, and we had all these like, on the outside, very, very fairy tale seeming trajectories for a lot of young artists. And so, I think this was a period where there was also a lot more opportunities, right? Like there was like a star search that happened that people could use. There was paths to child stardom. Of course, it's like most of our big pop stars from the specific era were in Mickey Mouse Club. They were like doing things that kind of gave them these like little ins um to being a singer and an actor, or whatever it was that they wanted to be. And so it's just a specific moment in time that existed. I feel like quite, like not unlike this
Hmm.
moment in time where people have social media to do the same. But it was also a time, of course, of really exploitative practices in the
Hmm.
industry, especially from family members. I mean, this was kind of
Hmm.
the dawn
Hmm.
of I mean, not even the dawn of it. It had already existed, but I think the toxic parent
Hmm.
manager was a big part of a lot of these stories. And in Aaliyah's case, like it was, her uncle having this music industry connection, but also being able to create a label called Blackground that she could be signed to. Um, So, I think it was a little bit of this very complicated, weird, kind of unchecked, like looking at, well, these child stars became famous because they had a family connection
Mm-hmm.
who could, push them, or these other child stars became famous because they had a, Svengali like creator who could, make them a label and make them, put them in rehearsals and put them
Hmm.
into vocal lessons and kind of train them into a star. So it was a very like unchecked, continuously unchecked time
Mm-hmm.
in the industry, where I don't think people again like had a lot of information on how bad it had been for a lot of the previous stars. I think they saw here and there, like, I think by the point probably early in Aaliyah, like starting to explore like Michael Jackson, like I feel like we were just starting to see the signs of
Hmm.
and starting to understand the trauma that he was experiencing via his father. Um, but and also starting to see the effects of it in his changes in physical appearance and his lawsuits, and that was still pretty. That's probably, like she was probably already deep in pursuing her own career by that point. I believe like that was after, she had been
Hmm.
on Star Search. So, I think it was some truths are starting to come up. I don't think people have the full stories yet of how bad those experiences had been.
Yeah, no, I think this is a great point because it is interesting that you point out Michael Jackson's upbringing, but also what he had revealed during the Oprah Winfrey interview back in '93, which is right before her debut album. So the conversation was just starting. But when we look at a lot of Black artists, especially young Black artists growing up in the '70s and '80s with the Jacksons, and then you got like what happened with New Edition to um I'm trying to remember who else, TLC. I mean, we started seeing like the documentaries, we started seeing their stories come out about the predatory practices that they had to go through, especially when they had no guidance about, the business of that world, signing predatory contracts and having to overwork themselves, be in a position where, um, a lot of really dark things have happened
Hmm.
early on, which would affect them in the later years. And Aaliyah would go on to release her debut album at 15 years old. It's called Age Ain't Nothing But a Number, which is such a very uneasy title when you think about the context it was done in. And she was working with and was mentored by R. Kelly, who was becoming a rising star in the R&B world. And I wonder about how did their interaction happen, and it was interesting because it was still quite rare for pop stars this young, especially under 18, aside from the Jacksons, to be lifted into the mainstream. Like, what do you think was the it factor for the people around Aaliyah to push her to be this next child prodigy star?
Yeah, I mean, she has like such a, I feel like even from that first album, you can really sense a sense of style and identity to her that is so rare to kind of find immediately in a young artist, especially someone as young as her. And, obviously, of course, had the vocal chops as well. And I think it all sort of created almost like a package of a pop star that didn't need a lot of further molding to kind of be able to appeal to a wide variety of audiences. There was something a little bit pop about her voice, but there's obviously her interests lied mostly in R&B and hip hop music. So there's a little bit of a mix of she could potentially appeal to both white and black audiences, or like to like a diverse array of audiences that go beyond just like one genre niche. So I think that might have been a big part of it. And also, yeah, they were molding very, very young stars at this time. Like they really wanted very young kids already starting to be workshopped towards being big superstars.
Mm, mm. Yeah, and also like her her emergence also would lead to people like Brandy, Monica, and later Maya, who came around that same period and are of that age. But also you can include Destiny's Child, with a
Hmm.
young Beyonce. And Aaliyah was the first of that crop. And, you know, R. Kelly, helped to authored many of her, practically all of the albums, practically, oh, sorry, I can't even say it. Practically all of her songs on that album, with the exception of At Your First, which was actually an Isley Brothers cover. And when I look back on this album, this is an album that I have not and still will not listen to, except at first You Are Loved. I have a lot of uneasy feelings about listening to anything that's R. Kelly related because of the darkness. And also R. Kelly, being from Chicago, I came from the Chicagoland areas when his music was very present during that
Hmm.
time. And, you think about the ominous presence that he had in Aaliyah's career. And you look at the cover of the album and you see R. Kelly in the background kind of leering at her. And
Hmm.
it just gives you the ick, right? And it calls into questions about what his motives were. And as we would soon see, like, they would wear matching outfits. They would be on shows together. R. Kelly was in his late 20s, so he was not of her age by any
Yeah.
means. And they secretly got married in Chicago, and R. Kelly was the one that manufactured it and had Aaliyah lying about her age. And this created a firestorm of controversy, and similar to what happened with Jerry Lee Lewis, who married his 13-year-old first cousin, and that would later doom his career.
Yeah.
And I wonder about that particular era or that particular period in her life and how Aaliyah's family, immediately forced the annulment, and Aaliyah would no longer be able to have contact with R. Kelly, and anything about her past with R. Kelly would be shunned out. I don't think Aaliyah has ever mentioned the name R. Kelly ever since their ties were severed.
Yeah.
So I kind of want to get your thoughts on that particular period.
I mean, I think there are just like so many countless examples of young artists being exploited by older mentors. And, I think in this case specifically, of course, R. Kelly was brought in by her uncle to be this kind of mentor figure to a, 14-year-old, like kind of very green R&B star with the person who is a big, already a pretty big and, kind of still at the dawn of his career, but still really, already kind of massive artist. And, I think there's a lot of lessons that a lot of artists since have gleaned, or a lot of people who, um, manage much younger artists have gleaned about leaving a young girl alone with an adult man for days and months to record an album. I don't think that would happen in the same way now at all, but I think, there was a lot of trust put into this, I think largely from her parents because her uncle was the one who introduced them. R. Kelly probably seemed like a very upstanding gentleman to them at the time to trust with their daughter. And it's just a really tragic thing. And it's hard, I feel like I have such like mixed feelings with the idea of how we engage with art by or created or produced or anything, people who have kind of have a problematic history or are
Mhm,
bad people. And I think with this, like, I'm like, I don't not listen to the Ronettes because Phil Spector was
mhm,
evil, and it's
mhm,
like I don't not listen to like Ike and Tina Turner Review because Ike was
mhm,
evil. Because at the end of the day, the voices on there that make those songs so powerful are Ronnie Spector or Tina
mhm,
Turner. Um, and I think with this, like, I have so much discomfort listening to R. Kelly's voice and especially his songs because his music at this time was not yet as hypersexual as it would become as his career continued on. And I find the hypersexual music from R. Kelly like really horrible to listen to. Whereas this, I'm like, there is so much of Aaliyah in here. Like, I mean, it's her album where I'm like, it does feel like a celebration of her to like appreciate what she kind of
mhm,
experienced. And also, you know, I don't know. I feel like I have like a little bit less of a thing with like listening to this album. Even though it's not even like my favorite album by her, like I
mhm,
feel like her sound gets so much better with Timbaland and Missy. But I feel like there are such moments here where you can still hear so much of that, like that very young powerhouse that she already was.
Yeah, because I know that when you think of Aaliyah, you don't think of powerhouse vocals immediately. You don't think of like Mariah Carey, Whitney
Hmm.
Houston, but more along the lines of a Janet Jackson and Diana Ross. And
Yeah,
her debut album had the street savvy, jack swing, hip hop, and R&B, and also like followed the success of Mary J. Blige's debut album,
yeah,
and very similar along the lines of it. And so she brought this kind of grittiness and this kind of like cute but spunky attitude that was very endearing to her young fans. And this was an album that was certified multi-platinum and selling over 3 million copies, peaked at number 18 on the Billboard 200, but was a very big on the top R&B hip hop albums chart. The song Back and Forth was the debut single, landed at number 5 on the top 100, and also At Your Best You Are Loved, the Ronald Isley Brothers cover, was number 6 on the Billboard Hot 100. So successful, but the R. Kelly falling out would kind of paint this picture, this really grim picture about where the future was going to go at that
hmm
time. And R. Kelly, meanwhile, which, I had no idea about the R. Kelly marriage during that time when I was like 11 years old. And I had no idea about that marriage until after her death. And R. Kelly, around 95, 96, and I started listening to him then, his music became bigger and bigger. Like, the song Down Low, you talk about
hmm
I Can't Sleep, Baby. And of course, I Believe I Can Fly, which I think everyone knew that song in middle school for me in 96. And yeah, like his career somehow withstood that kind of controversy where it doomed Jerry Lee Lewis, which I thought was very interesting. And for Aaliyah, it's kind of like, okay, now she's gotta have to pick up the pieces
yeah,
from it. And this would lead to her second album, One in a Million. And I think I've been hearing this. I kind of want a little more clarification, but I think that there were a lot of producers and writers that were very hesitant to work with Aaliyah by this point because of what happened with R. Kelly and the taintedness, and unfortunately, it was painted.
yeah,
The burden was put on Aaliyah, and she was only a 15-year-old girl, and this is something that we see with black girls being seen as adults,
yeah,
and how consequential that ends up being. And so, R. Kelly escaped major scrutiny. And for Leah with this album, if like she started working with Timbaland and Missy Elliott, they were unknowns and by this point, and they brought a new sound that
yeah,
no one had ever heard of. I mean, we were listening to Jack Swing, we were listening to more of like the gritty R&B sound,
yeah,
but this felt like more of a very unorthodox, very futuristic sound, and the way her vocals blended in felt like it was more of a, what we see now is the talking, singing, um, it's very talk sing, like, when we look at talk rap,
yeah,
and how it's being produced as. So for her, it was more like she just had that real chill vibe. And also you see how her looks have started to evolve to like the sunglasses, the baggy jeans, the hair flipped over her left eye. Um, yeah, what do you feel um was important with this particular second album, One in a Million, where she started to really take ascension?
yeah. There's something so, and this is such a mark of Timbaland and Missy Elliott as producers generally, but there is this like futurism to the music that makes it and sets it apart from so much of everything else going on in R&B in this decade. Like I feel like there was such a, you look at kind of the fusion of like hip hop and soul music at this time and New Jack Swing, and there's a little bit of this nostalgia almost that was a nostalgia cycle that was sort of like coming through in a lot of like the really huge R&B hits of this era. And I feel like with One in a Million, there was something very like sophisticated and strange and like a fusion happening with like trip hop and electronica and like it was and it was still so purely R&B and it was still so purely a distinct moment in this very specific genre, but that it pushed it kind of just further into the future and it has this like very sleekness to the production And there's again, like you said, like there's a coolness to her and this effortless cool in her vocals and in her performance style that is very, very apparent across this album.
Yeah, and I also felt like that album was a bit disjointed in a way because Timbaland and Missy did not produce the entire album of it. I think half of it was like a very different sound, so it's like it didn't
Hmm.
feel cohesive. But the main singles that came from it were the Missy and Timbaland produced songs,
Yeah,
and that's what would stand out. The song "One in a Million" um, was again, as you mentioned, it was very unorthodox, but it was so unique and
yeah,
like you've never heard before, but it's got such a like you could feel like you could slow dance to it, kind of do a little bit of a
hmm,
robot dance to it, I
yeah,
guess. But then the song "If Your Girl Only Knew" was this like this definitive statement, and then you got the Diane Warren song that people forgot about, the one I gave my heart to. I think
yeah.
people really forgot about that song, but it was a fairly big hit too. And, it was a very ballad, and it's a very typical Diane Warren. I mean, Diane
Right.
Warren would work with Celine Dion, Toni Braxton, so very balladeer and a little melancholy. I'm not always the biggest fan of her work, to be honest with you, but she did get to work with her, so that kind of
Yeah,
showcased a little bit of her versatility. And Hot Like Fire remix, I love that song so much. I remember when it came back onto streaming, I was super excited because that was a song I've been wanting to get. I couldn't get that song as a single back then because it wasn't
yeah,
released as such. So it was like there were some really transformative songs. There was the Got to Give It Up cover by Marvin Gaye that she did. Choosy Lover is a very interesting song. It's like a
yeah,
two-part, you got the very old school, and I love that version. Then she kind of goes back into that R. Kelly Ain't Nothing But a Number vibe, towards the end. So,
yeah,
I think that there was a lot of potential that was emanating from that album. And it would sell over 3.5 million copies in the US, 8 million worldwide. And If Your Girl Only Knew was a big hit as the lead single, and song For a Page Letter. I think For a Page Letter, what is so unique about is the way the song starts off, where the volume increases, for like the
yeah.
next 30 seconds. And she said, turn my music up. And, it felt like such a poetic, soft and tender song.
Hmm.
And yeah, like were there any songs that really like stood out for you from that era?
I mean, Four Page Letter was is my favorite from
Mhm.
the album, that and in the title track. Um, yeah, I think I just really I think there's nothing as special as kind of this moment in time for all three of them making these songs for the album of like her and of Aaliyah and Timbaland and Missy Elliott kind of coming together. I think there's something so beautiful and just like a great synergy of the three of them together on this. That's really incredible to even have documented of this like moment in time for these three really influential artists.
Yeah. And she was 17 years old at the time. So again, people forget that she was still a kid,
Yeah,
making a very grown adult album
yeah,
with these songs. I mean, these are like the songs that, people who have a long romance history, long relationship history would, talk about these subjects. And it's like,
yeah.
wow, she's only 17 years old at the time. And, she started, modeling for Tommy Hilfiger. She
Hmm.
started becoming this fashion trendsetter that, people started to look to. And um what with Timbaland and Missy Elliott, right from the get-go, their career really took off. Missy Elliott would release her debut album in '97, like around that time,
Hmm.
became a critical acclaimed album. Timbaland, and then also they would bring in Genuine, they would bring in other artists too to the fold, and like all of a sudden the music of R&B just changed exponentially, like almost overnight. Like
Yeah.
the song Pony, like it still lives on. I mean, I think it's
Hmm.
still, I think it's still played at strip clubs for all I care, and it's still like a song that people recognize.
Yeah.
And she would work with Timbaland again for the Dr. Dolittle soundtrack. Are You That Somebody in 1998. And that was a summer. And That was a huge hit alongside The Boy Is Mine and Ghetto Superstar, Brandy, Monica, Maya, and
Hmm.
it just felt like you could not get away from those songs. They
Yeah.
were very much an MTV, BET rotation constantly. And yeah, and what were your thoughts about that song in particular? Because it was a song that just really caught on and just,
Yeah, I mean,
took
that
off.
was probably my introduction to Aaliyah. Like, I feel like "Are You That Somebody" was like very likely the first I had ever heard of her because it came out, yeah, 98, so I must have been like six. Um and I again like was just watching so much MTV as a kid. So that song I have such an early radio memory of listening to and seeing the video. That and Try Again like were such heavy rotation videos on MTV, and songs that were, like you said, inescapable. Like they were just like literally on the radio constantly. So those were my earliest introductions to her. And I just remember thinking like she was like so beautiful and like so cool. And I was like, I want to dress like her. I want my hair to look like her. I want to like wear like little sunglasses and like baggy pants and tiny tops. And I want to be able to dance like that. And I just like absolutely adored those two songs. And it's so funny because I feel like it took so long for me to realize I was like, these aren't even like these are like for like movies. I was like, this is like the Doctor Dolittle soundtrack. Like that really crazy era of the late 90s where like the best songs were for the most insane movies, like really dumb comedy, like big comedies. Like I was to see like Beautiful Stranger by Madonna recently. I was like, this is
Yes.
like for Austin Powers. Like this is crazy that this is like what, and it's like Dr. Dolittle having this song is absolutely psychotic. But I'm like it's just such a good song. Um and yeah, I think it just took me so long in my life to even put together. I was like, oh, that wasn't like it was like a one in a million track that like made it onto the soundtrack. I was like, this was what it was made for. Um,
Yeah.
but I loved that era. I feel like that was the era for a lot of people, of really recognizing her star power because it was that combination of, she had these like, you know, one-off singles that were taking off. She had her first movie role in Romeo Must Die, like the Tommy Hilfiger campaign was happening. Like this was sort of that moment that is so crucial to any young pop star of really kind of becoming a very dominant force within the industry and like really becoming making your presence known as an entertainer. And it was also pretty rare, I feel like, for an artist like that to so quickly even transition into other fields, like her doing a movie so soon
Mhm.
after One in a Million comes out. It feels like for a lot of people that was her debut album in a way. And I feel like
Yes.
there was a reintroduction of her at that time with One in a Million. So, it's like a lot of stars don't do that until they've established their music career like even more so. And it was
Mhm.
very cool and interesting that she so quickly was trying to make it very clear that she was this multi-dimensional performer, who's very interested in showcasing her talents in as many fields as possible.
Yeah, I'll also be remiss if I didn't mention that she also performed at the Oscars around that time.
Mhm.
The song Journey to the Past, which, I don't think that's a song that people really get to hear of, but she was the youngest performer at the time to sing at the Oscars.
Mhm.
And so she was also trying to reach to a wider audience. And like you mentioned about this movie career that she would start to signal, and she would land a feature role in Romeo Must Die alongside Jet Li, and then with an unbecoming Anthony Anderson. And this would also come in with the soundtrack, which would have the song Try Again in 2000. And this part of the Romeo Must Die era became, again, another next stop into
Yeah.
stardom and into like I guess to a level superstardom because she was really excelling pretty fast and interestingly enough because R&B music at the time in 98 was hitting a renaissance. It was really taking its stride, and also hip hop was kind of taking a pause at the moment after Notorious B.I.G. and Tupac's
Mhm.
untimely death, and so now in 2000, the landscape has changed once again. Teen pop music, especially with white pop stars, really began to emerge. The Backstreet Boys and Sync, Britney Spears, Christina Aguilera, they were really starting to catapult themselves. Um, and I felt that Aaliyah, in some ways, was kind of an outlier in a way
Yeah.
because there weren't many black stars. I think Brandy and Monica were kind of taking a seat back after The Boy Is Mine. And so at this point, it felt like um I think maybe Maya was still trying to have her ascension there. But like Aaliyah was kind of in a way like in her own island at the moment. And I could be wrong, but when that song came out, I mean, it just flew off the handles. I mean, the
Yeah.
video was iconic. Um, the movie Romeo Must Die was a box office success, despite the fact that it didn't get really good reviews at all. And, there were criticisms like that, especially with years later when we revisit it, like, Jet Li and Aaliyah, being a romance couple felt really out of place during that time for an Asian man and a black woman to be connected felt really unorthodox. And so they decided to like not have the kissing scene. And it felt like there was a missed opportunity. But at that time, it was like it kind of showed where people's minds were at.
Was it before or after Brandy Cinderella?
Oh, good question. I think Brandy Cinderella was right before that. I think it was like
Okay.
98, 99, I believe. Yeah.
So crazy. Yeah.
Good
I mean,
point. Yeah.
it's, yeah.
Yeah. And yeah, did you
Yeah.
see Romeo
No,
Must Die?
Cinderella was 97.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Thank you so much for that
Wow.
too. I mean, that was also very groundbreaking in of
Yeah.
itself. And um and yeah, did you see Romeo Must Die? Like, I don't know what your thoughts on in that movie. I mean, I used to
I
watch that
haven't
movie.
seen it in forever.
Yeah.
It's been a really, really long
Same.
time. Also just like one quick backup aside, I was looking at the performers for the Academy Awards that Aaliyah performed at, and it's like the most insane lineup. It's like Elliott Smith, Miss Misery, Celine Dion, My Heart Will
Oh,
Go On,
wow.
Trisha Yearwood, How Do I Live, and Michael Bolton, Go the Distance. Like that is like the craziest. I think the craziest one you can
Craziest
ever perform
company.
at. Yeah, I mean it's like the some of the most iconic songs ever. Some of the most like, it's also just like such a straight like it's like literally such a great like it's like Elliott Smith as like the like kind of
Yes.
indie singer-songwriter, Celine
Hmm.
Dion, like obviously, it's like Trisha Yearwood country, like it's like such a weird
Yeah.
like it's anyway. I just wanted to say that because I was just like, this is I'm looking at it, I was like, this is crazy. But yeah, I mean I don't remember the last time I've watched Romeo Must Die. It's been a really long time, and I've been meaning to rewatch it. I probably will soon. But
Hmm.
I feel like I loved, and this was the same thing with Queen of the Damned, where I was just
Hmm.
like, and also, of course, the other thing was that she was going to be in The Matrix. Her like vibes were very goth. Like she like kind of has like a
Yes.
weird like I think that was something that there was like an interview I saw shared recently with her where she was talking about how she like was a huge fan of like Nine Inch Nails and
Mm,
like
yes.
really love like I was like there's such an untapped I mean thankfully it was tapped in her acting and in her movie roles, but there was such an untapped side of her musically that I think we still would have gotten and seen. But her taste was like extremely like goth and like
Hmm.
um I think that's like kind of well, that was one of my favorite things about her. And I think also like I think for a lot of young women of color who loved also like old stuff and like, kind of like loved you know, like darker movies and like things that were like a little more like, kind of like, like a vampire or like, yeah, I don't know, things like that. Like it's like I feel like there was a lot of representation from her in this way that was really cool because it was cool to see a black girl do the stuff that's like usually reserved for white people, it's like a lot of that like kind of roles like that were not really um typically given to like young black women to be in
Yeah.
these types of like action movies and these movies that were just like kind of a little bit like darker and more like kind of just like different and big budget like I don't know it was really I think that was the really cool part for me growing up. And I think what I appreciate about her, and I think what made me because I feel like at the time that she died, I mean, her career was so short. And I think my experience with her, because I was still so young, was just like the radio singles. And like that's pretty much all I knew
Mhm.
before 2001. And specifically, Are You That Somebody and Try Again. But I think when I started to dig into her career and life later, like going to these movies and seeing kind of like this like very less spoken about side of her taste and like aesthetic was just like the coolest thing because I was like, I know this is exactly my taste too. Like I was like, this is such like an interesting element of her that I didn't realize when I was, you know, 7, 8, 9.
Yeah, and I think that there was some like inspiration from Janet Jackson when did the Velvet Rope, where Janet was also transforming herself to a more goth, more very darker look, that
Yeah,
more darker and gritty look, that also like gave permission, like okay, there's other possibilities that are there for us, and I think
yeah,
for Aaliyah, she was that launching pad for it, and she like really set herself apart from the teeny boppers at the time because when I think of teeny boppers, I wouldn't think of Aaliyah as one of them because I felt like her music was more mature and there was a sense of assuredness that she had that, other pop stars felt like they needed more of a training wheels, kind of like
yeah.
where Aaliyah when she first started. So by that point, she was already a veteran, which is hard to believe because she was only like 20 years old or 20, 21 years old at that time. And you're like,
Hmm.
wow, like she's already a veteran at this. And, when we get into like her film career, like, Brandy was a successful TV star with
Hmm.
Moesha and the Cinderella movie. Whitney Houston was a great example because she had The Bodyguard, which was very transcendent. And, we saw how that took her career to a zenith. And, you know, Aaliyah had this potential to really become like, I mean, she could be a great rom-com star, she could be, I guess, in a way that's very alluring. And I don't know if she would be an Oscar winning actress. I mean, who the heck knows? I mean,
Yeah.
we only got a very, very small footprint of it, but I certainly think that she would have been in demand because she's got the beauty, she's got the sexiness and the
Well,
confidence that is very important.
I mean, if she did get to be in The Matrix,
Two and three.
yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, it's anyone's guess what could have happened too, because it's
Oh,
like that.
yes.
Those are some of the biggest movies ever made, and
Yes.
I feel like there's something, obviously again, very devastating on many levels already, but it's just like this like untapped
Hmm.
thing for her. It's like this thing that we don't know what would happen, but she very clearly was interested in action and sci-fi and those types of movies. And
Hmm.
so, it could have been really interesting to see her become
Yeah.
like a big action star. Because I feel like that
Hmm.
maybe would have been what she
That.
wanted to do. She could have been, you know, a huge, huge action star. She could have,
In the Marvel series, perhaps,
yeah, like, or
Yeah.
anything, she could
Hmm.
have been like Catwoman. I don't know. Like, she could have done like
Yeah. Better than Halle
anything.
Berry, I would hope.
But I think that was kind of where she was seeming to have. I mean, at least again, she was so
Yeah.
young, like that seemed to be her interest in the movies that she was picking at this time.
Hmm.
Um, and who's to say what would have happened if she had been able to star in the rest of the Matrix trilogy?
Yeah, and she also was slated to be in the movie Honey, which Jessica Alba took her part
Mhm.
instead. I mean, that was also a popular film. And Sparkle, which Jordan Sparks would replace her, and that movie wouldn't be made until like a decade later, which was Whitney Houston's last role, and that would have been very interesting to see that connection. So I think
Yeah,
there was a lot of versatility that she was really trying to showcase, besides being an action star, but also being a rom-com star, being a person who is more vulnerable. So there's very different levels that I think she was really trying to tap into that people saw that potential. And it
yeah,
felt like by this point, a lot of people were starting to think that she's starting to spend more time with film the way Whitney Houston was throughout most of the 90s.
yeah,
And we're getting 2001. It's been 5 years since her last album, and that is unheard of, especially for a very young star to have this long of a gap. But somehow she was still very present. I mean, like, the Dr. Dolittle song, the Romeo Must Die era, like it swallowed up a lot of the attention. It made it easy for her to like get away with not having an album for 5 years, especially in this day and age where like you got to release an album like at least 2 years, you know.
Hmm.
1 year might be a little bit too much, but artists have been doing that. So it's like she wasn't trying to overwork herself
Yeah.
in with the albums, but when she came to the her third and final album, I mean, it was released and she decided to like stray away from Missy and Timbaland, which is interesting because the um the two known singles, We Need a Resolution, which featured Timbaland, which I have to admit, as much as I don't care for Timbaland's rap, that was like one of the better raps that he's done, and it's very
Hmm.
catchy, it's very slick. And then you also have More Than a Woman,
Yeah.
and then the Missy Elliott song I Care for You. So those were like songs that were kind of like in the back burner from like, you know, during that particular transition period. But We Need a Resolution was the first single. Apparently, that was actually a last minute song because at that time Timbaland had broken off from Black Round, her record label, and I guess that he swooped in under Aaliyah's request and brought under a classic masterpiece, and it was very unique. Again, like similar to Try Again, but it had the Arabic sound. It was very unorthodox once
Yeah.
again, and the music video was very slick. It was very sexy. I mean, especially what she was wearing. You had the snake, slithering around her, which is right before Britney Spears, by the way.
Yeah.
I think people forget that part, but it was very highly sexual, and you get to see her maturation take shape. And that song wasn't very successful on the chart. It was only number 59 at the time. So it was like, I think it was too ahead of its time. People just had a hard time figuring that song out. And, even then,
Yeah.
like her lead single was supposed to be Loose Rap, which I did not think it would have been a good first single, which I don't
No.
seem to get it. It just didn't have that, that that strong banger that a lead single should have, especially of her stature. So
Yeah.
yeah, what were your thoughts on that third album and also the lead single?
Yeah, I feel like it was an album that was like clearly her transitional like adulthood album. It was like the album that was much more mature, much more um, trying to showcase that she's a grown woman now, that she's like an adult pop star. It's kind of the classic like thing that happens obviously with every, child or teen idol that sort of is trying to make a statement as they enter adulthood, and this was very clearly that. Um, and it's very sleek. It's much more pop. I feel like there's so much more of like when I hear like Rock the Boat or More Than a Woman, I feel like there is like a pop radio essence to those singles that um feel like a statement in and of itself of her own sort of positioning in pop culture at that point. And very clearly, this was sort of the step and the moment of pushing her to the next step of her career. She'd already again established her film career, her fashion presence, the success of many singles already. Like this album was very clearly primed to be the pop sort of
Mhm.
statement from her.
Yeah, I mean, it garnered her best reviews ever. Like, and I was very blown away by the rest of that album because she was trying to get away from the Timbaland Missy Elliott. So in a way, kind of like similar to Madonna, like, and I mean, even though Janet would work with Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis through most of her career, like she wanted a different sound, a different direction. And so
Yeah,
she garnered more into like the very sad R&B, like the very dark side of it, than to
yeah,
like um into the more futuristic industrial sound that she was going for. I think that she was supposed to do a song with Beck, I Am Music, which that would have been very interesting. I think Timbaland
yeah,
was supposed to work on that song, and that never like saw its full potential. And that album, contrary to a lot, I think what people have forgotten was that album was starting to slide off the charts pretty quickly after a couple of weeks.
yeah,
And I think that was when her record label decided, which was part of Blackground, which was a part of Virgin, Virgin Records, had some very expensive contracts. They had Janet Jackson's contract at the time, which was one of the biggest, and then Mariah Carey's contract that they
Yeah.
signed her to, which was record breaking. And there was a lot of questions about the profitability because Mariah Carey's Glitter was supposed to come out, but there was a lot of bad reviews and she was going through a very difficult period. So they're like getting very nervous. Aaliyah's first single didn't really hit it out of the ballpark as they had hoped. So they were trying to Rock the Boat and More Than a Woman to be the next singles. And they had her film those two music videos back to back within a week. And this would be happening right before she passed away. And it's kind of wild to me how that um the reaction from the record label, I presume, would, lead to um the events that would later happen, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Um so yeah, when I think about, the Rock the Boat video, I mean, this was the very last music video she had done. And, it was very beautiful. Her dancer, her choreographer, Fatima Robinson, did the beautiful choreograph. And, I don't want to get more into the plane crash, but it was deeply devastating and
Yeah.
a lot of what ifs, and I think it really also set the death knell to Virgin Records, but also with Blackground Records altogether because of the lawsuits, and you lose your biggest star,
Yeah.
and that just created um that created a hole. And yeah, I think about songs like I Can Be, Extra Smooth. Those are songs with just like songs that you could listen to like a decade or 2 decades from now. It's very timeless. Um and she had always talked about wanting to be like Sade, and she had that kind of persona, like, the smoothness, the calm collectiveness
Yeah.
that a lot of pop stars didn't have that she had. And um yeah, and there would later be a posthumous greatest hits album that would come, greatest hits and unreleased cuts that was released the following year. And like, it was very sobering. It was a very sobering reminder of what could have been. And in the years following, like, her cat like background became bankrupt, and like her albums were out of print. And
Yeah.
then when streaming was available and the original music purchases were available, it was nowhere to be found. The only album that was available was her debut album.
Mhm.
And, for me and for a lot of her fans, it's hard for like any of them to, use that as a launch pad. And I felt like her posthumous
Yeah.
era was very, very messy.
Yeah.
Unlike, what we see with Michael Jackson, Amy Winehouse, and to some level,
It
but it
is
just felt like
really
a.
depressing how kind of squandered that legacy was.
Mhm,
Yeah, I don't know, maybe not squandered, but like I feel like the people in charge of keeping
mhm,
her legacy alive have not yet figured out how to actually do that
mhm.
besides merchandising. Like I feel like it's
Yeah.
literally like the biggest way people have done that is through um like putting her face on t-shirts at like Fashion Nova. It's like that's
Mhm,
like kind of all that I've kind of continuously seen. The fact that it
mhm,
took so long to get her music on streaming is like absolutely absurd.
mhm,
Um, I feel like the use of her music has, there's so many opportunities to keep her
mhm,
music alive and keep her legacy alive and celebrated and like actually have like real um, you know, substantial kind of posthumous things
mhm,
that can occur. And, obviously, again, there's always kind of some like exploitative stuff with that type of, state kind of handling with it. But
mhm,
it's really like strange like, how little has been done for that. And
mhm,
um, I just don't know that there's anyone who's like properly handling it
mhm,
in a way that makes sense with any business savvy or care. Um, but yeah, I don't know. It's obviously, again, it's hard with the fact that she did not release that much music in her lifetime and
mhm,
you know, her life was cut so short. But it's like, I don't know, Kurt Cobain only released a few albums too.
mhm,
And like, we have like continued to celebrate and like
mhm,
continue to find ways to like let that legacy exist and thrive. And in whatever manner possible. So I don't know. I would love to see, and I think there's a statement about like about Alia in the sense that she herself was such a dynamic person and dynamic artist and dynamic public
Mhm.
figure that that legacy has fed itself without much help from her estate or
Mhm.
any of the business hands at play, where she's still, her songs are still played and people
Mhm.
still care about her in a deep way. And
Mhm.
there's still a relationship to her style and her, uh, even if it was just her aesthetic for a long time for people, like that's still a really powerful relationship that people
Mhm.
had with who she was. And so I think that is something really beautiful is that there's like still growing fandom that exists around her.
Yeah, and also like her music, like despite the fact that streaming of her music only became available like 5 years ago, I believe. Like for Aaliyah, like her music would inspire like the likes of Frank Ocean, SZA, Solange, Kalani, and so you could really see the music, her musical influence really,
Yeah.
casting a spell on the current landscape. And then also, yeah, I just hope that there's a better biopic movie of her because the one that Wendy Williams produced was so widely panned. And yeah, like to your point, like I actually people have said that she could have been big as Beyonce. I don't know. As musically, I'm not so sure about that part,
I mean,
but
I
yeah,
think we don't
yeah,
know,
yeah.
but I think it was very clear that she had much more than music
Oh
as
yes,
her
oh yes.
goals.
Hmm.
I don't doubt that there was still a huge fashion presence yet to
Yes.
be, unearthed from her. I don't doubt, like we were just talking about, that her movie career would have really
Hmm.
become something
Hmm.
really incredible. Um, I think that's the thing is that she was already so great at creating a presence in
Hmm.
so many different entertainment worlds.
Hmm.
And she was a theater kid when she was a kid. She could have done Broadway. She could have done
Hmm.
anything.
Oh
It's
yeah.
like there were so many things that she could have been able to do. So I don't doubt that is a world where she
Hmm.
could have been, on the level of Beyonce now. I think maybe just in a
Hmm.
different way
I think
or
in a
in a
different
different
way.
facet. Like I don't think,
Yeah.
I think they're so different. I was kind of like I think the comparisons between them are always kind of a little just kind of like, okay, two black women who existed at the same
Yeah.
time type of thing. But like,
Yeah.
I think like she is obviously a mark of
Mm-hmm.
that type of success that existed from that era,
Mm-hmm.
um, versus like a lot of other artists that existed in that era. And, I would have to hope that Alia would be able to have had a a very like wonderful career that could have
Mm-hmm.
been very big and successful for many years instead of, I think there was still obviously again like a lot of trauma that was not
Yeah.
being addressed at that time. Like I know that especially with the R.Kelly stuff, like she didn't talk about it even with people close to her besides calling him bad, and it was very triggering for her to talk about him.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and I hope that that's something that she could have been able to recover from in her
Yeah.
lifetime.
Yeah.
Uh, I think that's something that also has to be taken into
Mm-hmm.
as a factor is that we have to hope that that would have been something she could have been able to get over and not get over, but process and um, heal from in a healthy way.
Yeah.
But who knows? I mean, could have also been, she could have had like you know, her life sort of devastated even further by that experience. I
Mm-hmm.
don't know. Like it's
Yeah.
just like it's really hard to even imagine because she was still so young. Like it is like
Mm-hmm.
really like horrible. I mean, she's like so young.
Yeah, and also like I think she could have been more like on the level of Rihanna, like with Fenty and Savage X, because I felt like that's where I felt like she would have really been even bigger, and because she was such an icon, but also she had that visionary, that the sense to be able to do something like that. So like
Yeah.
I think that would have been like her gold mine. And yeah, and I think that there's so much unanswered questions by this
Yeah, I don't
point,
know. I feel like there has to be
and as we start
options. There
to
has to be
wrap up,
things
like,
like
yeah, like
like a
what do
Tommy
you
Hilfiger or
see the
like
future of Aaliyah's
nostalgia
legacy looking
like
like?
run. I don't know.
I
Like there
hope
has to
Yeah.
be
that it
things, but I think even just the
is
books basically just reissuing
handled
her
by
albums on vinyl, it's
better
like where is that?
people.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
I
and I
think
think
it
you
would
and I
be
should be like,
smart
be
for
in charge
them
of her
to, I don't think
for,
they've done
Yeah.
this yet,
take
but like a
control of it. It's like, okay,
vinyl
this is what we need
reissue
to do
of her
now.
albums.
So,
Let's get some
the 25th year
'Let's get some
anniversary
songs
already. So,
into,
yes,
it's like why not
TV
do
shows,
that? Why not
movies, like
agreed.
do like
Hmm.
where are they?
why is there
Yes,
no
get a
like
get
rock and
a
roll Hall
good
of
biopic this
Fame
time
exhibit
too.
or even
Even
Yeah.
plaque to
that,
her
I'm like, I don't
feet?
know.
I don't
But I
know.
feel
I
like
mean,
sometimes
Something.
that kind of
Why
it
is
tarnishes in its
there
own ways,
I
but
know it is. It is.
it
It
depends. I
is.
mean, if it's done
like
really well, but
Hmm.
reissue of her
after that,
films?
yeah,
Why
I
is
don't
there
know.
no
After the
Yeah.
like
first one, I'm not sure they could do
uh
it really well.
That's
I don't have a
true.
like
lot of faith.
celebratory
Mm, that's
things that
true,
are
especially with the
happening?
casting. But yeah,
Yeah.
Or
but yeah,
even, I know they've done like TV tributes
as I'm wrapping
before,
up this
but for the
episode
25th
here, I want to say
anniversary,
thank
I
you
would
so
hope
much
that
for
they're
being
gonna
on my
do
show.
one.
This was
Like
a really
the VMAs are coming
it
up.
was
Like
it's
I
been a
hope that
very
they do
important
something
conversation
around
for me to
it
have about Aaliyah's
for
legacy.
her.
And also I'm really glad that you've been
Yeah, I don't
able
know. I
to
feel like there
share
has to
your own
be
experiences, your own thoughts,
stuff.
about
And
her
again,
own
it's hard
legacy.
because there's
And I
so
hope that
little
people get to tune into your
to
work, through
work
Instagram, but
from
also through
in
Substack, which
this,
is
but it's like,
Britpop. So please check it out for the latest happenings in the pop music culture world. And also, yeah, I mean, she did some great cover stories. Like she did one on Jenny recently, so check that one out. So yeah. Other than that, yeah, thank you so much for your time. And yeah, so long live baby girl. So
Thank you.